I'm super excited. I told her this in the pre-show. I woke up this morning thinking about, we didn't really rehearse this and we didn't see the lineup. And I was like, can we please get Maria to do something about a quilt? I need to see a Maria. I need to see a Maria quilt. And sure enough, she was already in the lineup. So Maria, what do you got for us? This is the darling Maria Shell, who gets some sort of lifetime award for serving the Wrangell Mountains Center's board forever. She owns her own cabin right next to our beautiful campus, and she is a world-renowned quilt artist who has remade herself on Zoom, and it's truly amazing. And you can see her studio back there, and you can get color therapy on her Facebook page. But what do you got for us tonight, Maria?
Well, I'm going to, so I'm in Anchorage. This is my studio in Anchorage. These are social bubbles. Like it? Yeah. So, yep. And this one here, which is much more in progress, is Please Stand By. Do you remember the days when the news cycle stopped, right? And we didn't get news, and that little funky screen came on the TV, and that's what that is. Look at this little, I prepared a little slideshow. So this is me in McCarthy, in my little studio that's on the back side of our cabin, which is across the street from the Wrangell Mountains Center. I call it my plein air studio because there are holes in the wall, and you're invited to come down and say hi. I've got little rocking chairs for people to sit in and join me while I work on my quilts. Now, I have a little story that I want to tell, but for Nancy, I'm going to show a couple of quilts that maybe she's seen, maybe she hasn't. In the quilting world, there was a huge event last week called Quilt Con, and it was virtual this year. I taught there, but two of my quilts were recognized at the show, and one of them was this quilt, which is called Everything All at Once. And then this quilt, which is called Mosh Pit at the Golden. And I always, I think of being at the Golden, and I'd never been in a mosh pit at the Golden. So I was kind of surprised by it. I don't know how long ago. This is like a decade ago. And I remember at some point I hear Monty yell, "This is the best mosh pit at the Golden ever." And that is where the name of that quilt comes from. So this quilt here is McCarthy Road. And then the last sort of newer quilt to show you folks is Yakalop, which is a newer quilt. And I worked and worked and worked on it. And I showed it to Mark Vale, and he said, "You got to turn that sideways. It's going the wrong direction." And sure enough, he was right. So that's that quilt. What I really wanted to tell you folks about today, which some of you may know about, maybe don't know about. Part of my practice is making community quilts. And I started out doing that by making quilts to welcome babies to the community. I originally started this in Valdez. But this is a quilt that was made for Max, who is Rebecca and Jacob's son. I call it Max's man quilt because this quilt features more artwork by dudes from McCarthy of all the quilts that I've made. It's got Chris Chester, all kinds of Malcolm, just an assortment of characters that are part of this man quilt. But I've also, from making these community baby quilts, I've made quite a few quilts for other communities, and I've made two for the community of McCarthy, and this is the first one, and it's called McCarthy Day, and it was part of a week-long event held at the Wrangell Mountains Center. Nancy and I were collaborators in this week of creative adventures. The students did performance art, and they wrote, and they made books, and they gave a reading, and they participated in a community quilt. So this is the first one, and I will say in the center, many people, Nancy, I don't know if you know this, but many people think those are your breasts. Did you know that? And I have to tell them they're Lindsay Pepper's breasts. They're not yours, Nancy.
I never once, and I hear everything, heard that those might be my breasts.
I think well, you haven't been listening. Anyway, so this quilt is the first community quilt that I made, and it lives at the hardware store. And then this quilt is all community members, and it's called McCarthy's Solstice. And I thought I would just share a little bit about the background of this quilt. Back in August, I want to say 2012, at the hardware store, we had a community quilt block making afternoon. So when I do a community quilt party, I prep all this fabric, and that's what you're looking at right there. And I prep it with a fusible heat activated surface. So on the back of all the fabric is this heat activated glue, and people come in and they make their quilt blocks. And this is everybody kind of working on their quilt blocks, and it gets really crazy. I have come to know that when people are in this sort of creative zone, they're not very tidy, and they glue things to random things. And I have to just let go of that. And there are actually quite a few people in the audience that participated in this quilt, which is awesome. So after I made the blocks, well, after everybody else made the blocks, I took it over to my cabin. And at the time I had a design wall that went through the corner of our front cabin room, and that's the quilt sort of in progress. And what I was trying to do, if you look down at the bottom, these are all like the human part of McCarthy. And then the next row up is sort of where we connect with the water. And then from there we go up to the mountains. And then from there we go to the glacier. So each row within the quilt, different people's blocks that represent different things about McCarthy. So I thought I'd share some close-ups. Paul Hannis's mom and dad are both involved in this quilt. And there are just an assortment of blocks and so these are all what we call surface design or fusible applique. And then all of the piecework are things that I have done. So anything that's pieced is something that I've made. So this is Paul and Paul's mom and dad's quilt blocks. And then this one's by Karen Loso. That's a Dryas. And Nancy, I don't know if you remember this. This is you and Emmett made this quilt block together.
Look at how he could barely write his name. What year was this? Emmett's now going to school in Ireland.
Right. And you guys picked a photo from one of the books about the mining days, and then you duplicated it in fabric. So this is Barbara Rice's Crazy McCarthy Person, and we have all seen a few of those. Yep. And this is Nancy Cook's woodshed, and she's done an assortment of woodsheds. It's actually my woodshed depicted by Nancy in fiber.
Can I just say really quick, like this was around the time we were acquiring Porphyry Place, which was one of Maria's amazing donations to the Wrangell Mountains Center, was running the capital campaign so we could buy Porphyry Place. But this says, this is Yodel Length, which Ed LaChapelle used to own, you know.
Yep.
And he was a master of a woodshed. He was very serious about his woodshed. So when Maria bought Ed's woodshed, I felt like I had to sort of commemorate Ed. So he used to tell you how long a piece of yodel wood should be. That's
I also think
nod out to Ed LaChapelle.
Yes, and Meg Hunt, which also Meg's actually part of this quilt. So there, and I think this is kind of interesting today, Nancy, you have the braided river behind you, and there's also the braided river in this quilt. That's made by Ronnie English. And this is one of my favorite quilt blocks made by Christine Johnson, fisherwoman. Amazing quilt block. And this is Mark Vail with the bears that travel in his neighborhood. And then this is Sonny Cook's quilt block here. And then I think this is kind of a fun little story that this gentleman, his name's Barry. I'm not sure what his last name is. Can't really read that. But he was traveling to ends of roads. And he got to the end of the McCarthy Road. And Jim Drury said, "You haven't made it to the end of the road yet." So it was pouring down that day. and pouring down rain that day. And I saw him in the corner. I was like, who is this guy? What's he doing? He's like reading a book while everyone else is bustling around making a quilt block. And finally I talked to him and he's like, oh, I'm just in here to stay dry. And I said, well, you should make a quilt block too. So we did. Because I do think people that are traveling to ends of roads are definitely part of our community. This is my middle son Ozzy's contribution. This is Paul Hannis's, which, you know, he's an artist in his own right, not a quilt maker, but you can see that his artistic skills translate. Yeah. And this is Denise Lopez's block here, which I think is very festive. And at the very top of the quilt is a block by Meg Hunt. And I thought it was, I really, you know, I like the idea of putting her snowflake block at the top of the quilt, really as, in many ways, she was the, you know, a symbol of the matriarch for our community for many years. And then Eva loved Meg's block so much that Eva did her own version of it. And if you want to see this quilt in person, you can visit the McCarthy-Kennicott Historical Museum. In the last 10 years, the museum has expanded its collection to include contemporary artists. And that is part of how McCarthy Day came to exist at the museum. And I just want to thank the Wrangell Mountains Center for supporting the arts. And I hope that you all will support the Wrangell Mountains Center.
Thank
And
you.
that's my thing for tonight.
Yeah.
Oh, that was wonderful, Maria. I can't wait to see you in person, making magic with color. You're a color alchemist. And we're so lucky to have you in our community.
I can't seem to turn my screen off. Okay, yes, I'm lucky to be part of the community. Thank you, folks.